everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm giving you a beginner's guide introduction to the author Kazuo Ishiguro. And I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. I am just so bad at remembering the pronunciations. I think I've got it right, but if I've got it wrong, I'm sure you're already typing comments correcting my pronunciation. But Kazuo Ishiguro is one of my favorite authors. I've read all of these books in my hand. There's in fact only one of his standalone novels that I have not read, which is The Unconsoled. So I really want to give you a little bit of a deep dive onto this author today, and then also give you a suggestion of places to start with his work. I'm going to give you a few different options of reading order for his books, depending on how you're coming to discover this author. So Kazuo Ishiguro was born in Japan but moved to the UK as a child and grew up in Surrey in the 60s. A lot of his early books really reflect a lot about his Japanese identity and his memories from living in Japan as a child and his family's memories. But many of his later books have much more of an experimental style. He's widely considered also one of the most illustrious British authors of our time. So going through these books chronologically, like I said, the first couple of books really take place in Japan, or kind of an imagined Japan. A lot of it, the history is real, but there's always a slightly unreal element to his books, even the more literary ones. His first book, A Pale View of Hills, came out in 1982. This book and also his next book that came out in 1986 are both set in Japan, and both of them received a lot of positive critiques, but he really made his big splash with The Remains of the Day. This one came out in 1989 and is still widely regarded as one of his best books. The Remains of the Day won the Booker Prize and also was adapted into a major film. I've still not seen the film and I really do want to. I've heard really good things. And this is also one of my personal favorites of Kazuo Ishiguro's books. Later on, he went on to experiment more in terms of his writing style, his genre, blending a lot of different elements into his works. Firstly, we have Never Let Me Go, which is much more of a coming of age story, but it's like heavy on the speculative fiction, slight dystopian take. Then we also have The Buried Giant, which is a beautiful book that has almost a myth-like quality. It's as if it's this old folklore tale. And then one of his most recent books is Clara and the Sun, or I think this is his most recent book, which definitely has much more of a sci-fi leaning take. This is a story following an artificial friend who is given to a young girl. While he mostly focuses on standalone stories and novels, he has also written a few screenplays and short stories, and one of the short story collections that I've read is Nocturnes. This is a beautiful book of short stories all around the theme of music, and music is something that's really important to Kazuo Ishiguro. He is also a talented lyricist and has worked with jazz musicians in the past as well, and you can see that really coming through in this book in particular. In 2017, he actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which is a Nobel Prize given to an author for their entire body of work. He's also actually been knighted for his services to literature, and he's won many other book prizes over his long career. I'll tell you a little bit more about these books as we go through, but I thought I would jump in and tell you my proposed beginner reading order. This first reading order is going to be if you're looking for diving in from kind of his most straightforward or easiest, like most accessible books, all the way up to his slightly more complicated, or like maybe some of his more divisive books where he has a very strong tone or voice that you might not get along with. In terms of starting off with his work, if you're looking to jump right in and it to be easy and accessible, I think that there is two ways to go, depending on which one sounds more interesting to you. The two starting points I would say for beginners would be Never Let Me Go and Clara and the Sun. So Clara and the Sun is his most recent book. This came out in 2021, and this has, I would say, very easy to read and kind of quite simplistic prose. You are, like I said, reading from the perspective of an artificial friend. So this book is narrated by an AI, and I would say in terms of theme, it's quite a straightforward theme in terms of AI and also love and loneliness and connection. I really liked this book. I think it's a really great place to start. I wouldn't say it's going to be my favorite of his books for probably the reasons I've already outlined, it being slightly on the more simplistic side for me, and I like quite hard and crunchy sci-fi. This is not not a difficult sci-fi. It's much more focusing on the emotion and the theme, but it's a great place to start, especially if you don't normally like sci-fi. The other starting point I would say is Never Let Me Go. So this is the coming of age story that is set in this slight dystopian world. This also has a very popular movie that you may have seen as well, and I would say definitely if you like the movie, go ahead and read the book. I'm pretty sure you're gonna like the book. Or if you're like me and always like to read the book first before watching the movie, then you can do that. This one I would say is easy to read because it is very gripping. It's emotionally charged and it will pull you through the story. This is set in contemporary England, or like England in the 2000s, and you are following a group of students who are in this boarding school. It's narrated by one of the students as a 30-year-old woman looking back on her childhood. And as you read through, there is this kind of sense of dread, or like something hanging over this like seemingly very perfect and idyllic childhood. This is many people's favorites of Kazuo Ishiguro's books, so definitely a great place to start to see if you get on with him as an author. Next up in your proposed reading order, I would say The Remains of the Day. This one is my personal favorite out of all of these books. This one is actually set in quite an accurate historical, it's like a historical fiction set in 1956, and you are following the story of a butler called Stevens. He's the butler of this very grand Darlington Hall that has kind of seen better days, and he is taking one of the only holidays he's ever taken as his time as a butler. So you're following him on this short holiday as he's also reflecting on his career as a butler to this great house. It is so beautifully written. I adore Stevens as a main character. I was immediately bought in to him as this very complicated man who has not come to terms with a lot of things that have happened in his life. The narrative is pretty coherent. It's not going to try and confuse you on purpose like some of his other books might. This is just such a zoomed in view on one man's life, and it will make you laugh and it will make you cry. It's just an absolutely gorgeous book and I adore it. Next up, I would recommend picking up An Artist of the Floating World. This one is set also in a more specific historical time in Japan in 1948. You are following an aging painter as he has just retired and he's looking back on his life. He wants to look back on his career with pride, and he has lots of pride in some ways, but also is wrestling with changing cultural values of a more modern Japan, a post-war Japan, and what that means for himself and the actions he had taken in his own career as an artist. This one is a very calm and I would say definitely a very readable story. I read this pretty quickly and I really enjoyed it. I would say there's definitely a lot more ambiguity in terms of like moral ambiguity about this artist. Also, I think that it might help you to have a little bit more context about Japan as well in the World War, to be able to pick up on a lot of the different layers that are going on within this story. Also, this book has one of Kazuo Ishiguro's favorite kind of devices that will come up more later, but he plays around a lot with memory and how we remember things versus other people's memories, and I think it's done really well in this book, and definitely not too complicated to read, but there's some layers there. So that one's next. Next up, I'm going to put in his short story collection Nocturnes. This one, I would say I would read it if you have read the others and then you're interested in diving into his short stories. This one isn't like complicated or too detailed, but I would say because it's so highly focused on these short stories around music, it wouldn't be the best jumping off point in terms of starting with this author. This one also talks a lot about age as well as music and trying to keep alive like love and passion, and I think it does it really well. It's not the most memorable out of all of the books for me though, so I'm kind of putting it here. Next up, I would suggest jumping in with The Buried Giant. This one is a really interesting one because it is deliberately trying to disorient you as the reader, which you might think, why would I put this now instead of at the end of this list in terms of easiest to hardest to jump into? But there is something that is just so involving about this book, and I just absolutely loved this one too, and I really want to reread it. This is set in a kind of mythical Britain, in like after the Romans have departed, but it's like this very mythical Britain, not a historical fiction in any sense. It's about this elderly couple who go off to try and find their son, and they have to journey through a land of mist and rain to find— Sorry, the door went, but I'm back now. Where was I? Talking about The Buried Giant. So yes, this is about this elderly couple and they are aware that this is going to be a very hazardous journey, but they need to go and see this son that they've not seen in many, many years. This is written almost like an allegory, like a myth, and it's his most kind of fantastical story, or like in the sense that it has fantasy elements rather than like sci-fi or speculative. And so I would say it's challenging in that sense of it being slightly longer, I guess, than some of the other books, but also just kind of it's very subversive in expectations, and it's a really, really beautiful book. I think maybe if I reread this, it could knock The Remains of the Day off the top spot, but I need to reread it to find that out. Next up in my reading order, I would suggest A Pale View of Hills. This one and the final one are pretty interchangeable in terms of like the least accessible, I would say. But I put this one first because it is just that much shorter, meaning it's just, I find shorter books that are just a bit easier to get through. So this, like I said, is his debut book. This is the book that came out first. And this is the story about a woman who is looking back on the life that she lived in Japan. She is dwelling on the recent loss of her daughter. And she's in particular dwelling on this very long hot summer that she lived in Nagasaki when she was pregnant with her daughter. And this relationship she struck up with a woman who lived nearby who was very wealthy but kind of very mysterious as well. And this one is one of the books that I put down at the end, and I thought, I don't know what to even make of that. This one has Kazuo Ishiguro's classic memory and imagination blending. You're not sure what is real, what's imagined, what's remembered, and what maybe the main author is, like the main narrator is lying to herself about. I think that there's a lot of different things that you could take from this story, and I don't know if there's any definitive answer on what it's even about, which is interesting, but I would say definitely one of the more difficult places to start. And then finally, the last book on this list is When We Were Orphans. This one is similar in the sense that it has a strong sense of the narrator is either lying to you or lying to himself. There's a lot of playing around with memory. It's very dreamlike in places. You're left really not knowing what's actually happening and what is a dream or imagined. But also this book is very fun as well. It's kind of got this really interesting main character that is this man who is living in London in the 1930s, and he's become a very successful detective and investigator. He can solve any mystery and figure out any kind of missing persons case except for the one in his own past. And through this story, you have these jump backs in time to when he was a small boy living in old Shanghai when his parents went missing and the case was never solved. So this is kind of a detective story as well. It's got this intrigue, this central mystery going on, but it's got also an incredibly unreliable narrator. And I don't usually like saying that about books because I think that that's kind of a bit of a spoiler going in, but you know that pretty early on. And also I should tell you that because that's one of the reasons why this is a difficult book to read. If you like books that have that reality bending kind of theme, you'll really like this. If you like detective stories with a twist, you'll definitely like this. But it's definitely one of the books that is a really difficult starting place, I would say, for Kazuo Ishiguro's work if you're going in wanting just to get a flavour of his writing before diving in deeper. So that one's in the final spot for this specific reading order. So that would be, if you're coming as a beginner, that would be my suggestion of the reading order for Kazuo Ishiguro's books, and I've described all of them. But you may have already read some Kazuo Ishiguro and be looking for what to jump into next. So next up, I'm going to give you a reading order that is based more around theme and vibe, and grouping the books together in a way that if you've read one of them, you can see what other similar ones there are and where to go to next. Or if you're very sure on the type of books that you enjoy, I will give you a good hint at where you might want to start. So some of the themes I'm going to talk about are going to blend and blur into one another, but firstly, because we were just talking about it, let's talk about books that have the theme around memory, unreliable narration. So obviously there is A Pale View of Hills that I was just mentioning about the woman who's looking back on her time in this long hot summer in Japan. And you also of course have When We Were Orphans, that is about the detective story trying to find what happened to his parents who went missing. They're the two strongest in terms of memory and unreliable narration, but also it comes up really strongly as a theme in An Artist of the Floating World about the aging artist who's looking back on his life. So if this is your theme, these are are the ones that you should definitely start with. Next up, let's talk about the next theme, which is kind of about dignity, service, and also slightly leading on from the memory theme, or more about self-deception. And within that, I would also put an artist of the floating world. But of course, if this is your theme, then the remains of the day is where you should definitely start if that is something that's interesting to you. These books talk about dignity and of service and careers and working and looking back on your life and what you've achieved, and have that level of kind of self-deception as well, and a really interesting character studies, I would say, about these people looking back on their life. The next theme is also more generally about war as well. That's a big theme that comes up in Kazuo Ishiguro's writing. Also the kind of national identity with war and trauma as well. So this one comes up in a lot of the different books, including When We Were Orphans. Also An Artist of the Floating World. Both of these deal with that kind of national identity and war, and also trauma on a personal level. And I would also put in The Remains of the Day there. The next theme I kind of want to talk about is more about technology and ethical dilemmas, moral ambiguity involving technology, what advances could do for us as humans, but also emotionally and morally. And within that theme, we have two books as strong contenders: Clara and the Sun and Never Let Me Go. Both of them have this kind of theme of ethical dilemmas, technology, also about care, humanity, and loneliness too. So if you've read one of these, definitely try the other one if you liked it, and vice versa. So the two books that haven't kind of fit into either of those neat theme buckets that I was putting things into are Nocturnes and The Buried Giant. The Buried Giant does to me feel like a very different type of book than a lot of the other ones on this in this video, and also Nocturnes, just because it is a short story collection and so focused around music. They don't as easily fit into the buckets that I've put into, but if you've read all of these books, then let me know what you think as well. Okay, my final suggested reading order is going to be genre-based rather than theme-based. If you know that you like historical fiction but you really hate sci-fi, then this is the section of the video for you. I'm going to be just telling you which ones fit most easily into different genres, because as you probably have already realized, a lot of these are genre bending and melting into different ways, which is the beauty, I think, of this author's work. But if you're looking for things more genre based, then this is the list for you. So starting off, and I'd say the most of the books fit into this category, is realistic or like historical fiction, things that don't technically have any like speculative elements to them in a very definitive way. And for that category, for realistic and historical fiction, we have A Pale View of Hills, which is set in post-war Japan, An Artist of the Floating World, also set in Japan after World War II, Remains of the Day, which is set in the English countryside in the 1950s, and When We Were Orphans, which is set in 1930s London and Shanghai. Obviously this one is detective style, but it's still like realist at its core, I would say. Next up, the most speculative and science fiction are again going to be Clara and the Sun and Never Let Me Go. If you are picking between these two books as a place to start, I would say I would often recommend Never Let Me Go as the starting point, just because it is so emotionally powerful. Clara and the Sun is a beautiful book, but it's one that I don't think would stay with me nearly as long as Never Let Me Go. So that is more sci-fi, speculative fiction, dystopia, AI, technology based. And then finally, obviously, for the fantasy elements or allegorical elements, we have The Buried Giant, and also I think, I haven't read it so I can't confirm, but I think The Unconsoled would fit most cleanly with The Buried Giant in terms of both theme and genre. I'm not 100% sure, obviously I've not read it yet, and I don't like to read too much about books before I've read them, but I think it is much more of a surreal type book, more similar to The Buried Giant than to any of his other novels. And then obviously if you love short stories, this is the place to start. So that is my beginner's guide to Kazuo Ishiguro. I hope that even if you knew everything I was already saying about this author, that you still enjoyed this video. I hope that if you're a beginner and have never read any of his books before, that you've got some idea of a place to start. In terms of my personal ranking, which I haven't yet done in this video, I will do that though, but I'm going to keep it to the end because I want people to not be affected by my own personal thoughts and try and jump into where they think that they would like these books the best. But if you are going to leave a comment on this video, I would love to have your ranking. If you've read any of these books, what was your favorite? What was your least favorite? Before I do my ranking, I would love to say thank you so much to my Patreons. You guys are the absolute best. I appreciate you so much for supporting me and supporting this channel and making this the best place to be on the internet. So thank you guys. I love you so much. Now on to my personal ranking. Obviously, we do have The Remains of the Day at the top of the list. I'm going to reorganize this stack just to be my personal ranking. Next up is going to be The Buried Giant. That one is in the number 2 spot for me, even though I do want to reread it. I want to see how I feel about that one. Number 3 is Never Let Me Go. Absolutely love this book as well. Probably the first one I ever read from this author too. Now it's getting harder because I really enjoy all of these books, but I probably would say my next one is An Artist of the Floating World. I really enjoyed this one and it was very surprising to me how much I enjoyed it. So that's my 1 to 4 so far. Now, what comes next? And also, what comes last? I think next up, oh, it's between 2. I think next up I'm gonna have to do When We Were Orphans. This one is just a very wild story and I really enjoyed it. And then after that is definitely Clara and the Sun, which feels bad that this one's so far down my ranking, but I still really enjoyed this book. I think I had really high expectations for it because I'd read so many of his other books and loved them, and I just wanted maybe a little bit more from it. And then the final 2 books, I'm going to put Nocturnes next, and then at the bottom of my list is A Pale View of Hills. So that is my personal ranking. I would love if you could do the same in the comments below, or if you haven't read any of the books, tell me where you think you're going to start. That's my final ranking of my favorite to my least favorite, but this isn't saying best to worst. This is just saying my personal favorite. I love all of these books and I just think it's so fun to really deep dive into an author. I did want to wait to film this video until I'd also read The Unconsoled, but to be honest, I wanted to talk about it. I want to talk about it with all of you, and I think it'd be really interesting to try and slot in The Unconsoled as well once I've now read it and see how I feel about it, because it's a very interesting book apparently and it's very divisive as well. So I'll be interested to see what I think of that one and where it would fit into my personal ranking. So thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I want to do another author deep dive very soon with Ursula K. Le Guin, so that will be coming up soon. If there are other authors you've been interested in reading, then let me know and I'll challenge myself to do a deep dive into their backlist and do a similar type of video for you. Other than that, I think that's everything from me today. So thank you so much for watching and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!